One of the great things about making toys is that it gives you an excuse to play with them first. After all, you must be sure those wheels turn freely, right? My first two cars were VW Bugs, so I still have a connection to them. Kids love any toy on wheels, and they can play with cars for hours. This food and gas stop has many parts, but none are difficult to cut. It will be a great weekend project for anyone with basic scroll saw skills. I'm starting with the 3/4 inch thick car bodies and using a number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I base my blade size choice on the wood's thickness, hardness, and pattern complexity. If you'd like to see a full discussion of this topic, I left a link to my video on the screen and in the description. Since I plan on painting this set, I'm making everything from poplar since it takes paint nicely. I already drilled the holes for the axles because I found through experience that when holes are drilled close to the edge after you cut the item's shape, sometimes the drill bit follows the path of least resistance and goes through the side rather than straight through. It's not worth the risk of ruining parts, so I drill interior holes before cutting. This project has no intricate cuts and is within even a beginner's skill level. The first piece I cut will be one of the van's roofs. It's long and narrow. Once I finish the cut, I carefully set the piece aside. If I dropped a part like this, it could easily get lost in the sawdust pile under the scroll saw. I guess that's telling me it's time for some house cleaning. The next car I picked up to cut was a VW Bug. This car has a cutout for the side window, and I drilled a pilot hole for it simultaneously with the axle holes. It's always a good idea to make any interior cuts first. For a part like this, you have a large piece of material to hold onto while you're cutting out the window. If you cut the car's outside first, you would handle a smaller shape. Your fingers would be much closer to the blade, and I find smaller pieces more difficult to control. The choice is up to you. This is just my advice based on hundreds of hours of cutting on scroll saws. After I cut out the windows, I made the outside cut for the beetle. This is easy, just a matter of following the line. Sometimes you end up with a small rough spot where the cut started and ended. This is because as you cut, the blade may wander a bit one way or other from the line, but it's no big deal. It only takes a bit of hand sanding to smooth this out later. The next car is a convertible, which I believe Volkswagen called a cabriolet. Because the top is down, there's no interior cut for a window. Because of the windshield's shape, this car requires a bit of skill to cut. You must cut a thin strip with a curve at the top where the cut changes direction 180 degrees, and this step's a bit delicate. There's another van, and I cut that next. I remember that one of these styles was called microbus, but I can't remember the other. I want to mention that I was a huge VW fan back in the 60s and 70s. My first car was a black VW Bug that I bought for about $700 in cash while I was on semester break during my junior year in college in January 1967. One of my grandfathers gave me $300 toward the cost. In late December 1971, I drove from Chicago to Colorado Springs with my brand new bride. I was on my way to my last year of active duty in the Army at Fort Carson, Colorado. I was just back from Vietnam, when the engine threw a rod on the edge of town. I had it towed to a VW dealer where they gave me $200 for it toward a trade-in on a new 1972 Volkswagen. The new Volkswagen was $2,200, so minus the $200 trade-in, the loan amount was an even $2,000. The payments were $69.10 a month. I've been recording most of my videos lately from my camera on a mini tripod sitting on a counter to the right of my scroll saw. But I wondered if that was the best camera angle, so I moved the camera to a tall tripod off my left for this segment. What do you think? Is this perspective better, or should I stick with the view from the right? I shifted the angle again with the camera on the tripod looking over my left shoulder. I'm cutting another one of the microbuses. I zoomed the scale into 200% during editing so you can see the lines more closely and the views more similar to what you would see when cutting. Again, I would appreciate your comments on which view or views you prefer the most. Should I use a single view, or should I mix up the perspective throughout the video? This set of vehicles requires many thin parts, so I switched to a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade to cut the parts from 1/4 inch thick poplar. I resawed 4/4 poplar down to create the 1/4 inch material. I'll leave a link to my video on resawing in case you'd like to learn more about that process. Many scroll saw projects require thin stock, and it's not always available in the species I need. As I recorded cutting these next few parts, the camera was positioned on a mini tripod, which was placed on top of a cart to the left of the scroll saw. The camera level is slightly higher than the scroll saw's table. The VW convertible has a layer on either side of the car's body, with another layer on top of that, and the vehicle is completed with fenders as the outermost layer. All these parts are from 1/4 inch material. The outer layers of the van and microbus are also cut from 1/4 inch material. The van has one window on each side, and the microbus has several. I'd already drilled the pilot holes for all of these at the drill press, so it was just a matter of making the cut for the window, removing the blade, and then repeating the process until all the windows were cut. There were more van and microbus sides to cut, so I moved the camera back to the mini tripod on the counter, positioned to the right side of the scroll saw. This is a convenient place to set up, and I think the view is good, so this is the position I've been using for most of my recording. Do you agree? The final parts I'll be cutting from the 1/4 inch material are the fenders for the Volkswagen Beetle and Volkswagen Beetle convertible. I like to start cutting those at the bottom of the front fender, then follow the line clockwise until I return to the starting point. You may find that you end up with a slight bump at the start-stop point, which is why I prefer to start at a location on the outside that's easy to reach. It's easy to go back later and touch up the bump by hand with a small piece of sandpaper. The floor and roof of the food stop are rectangles cut from 1/2 inch thick stock, and I made those at the table saw since they're long, straight cuts. The table saw is much better suited to straight cuts than the scroll saw. I used my drill press to make these 3/8 holes in the top and bottom. The holes are 3/8 deep and will accept 4-inch long dowel rods supporting the roof. If you can't visualize that, it will make sense when I get to the assembly stage. There are a few odds and ends pieces left to make from 1/2 inch stock. One rectangular piece is the counter, which will get a 1/4 inch thick top to overhang the sides. I'm making 2 of these sets, so I'll cut out 8 little rectangles representing the gas pumps. These are all straight cuts, but these parts are too small to cut safely on the table saw. Rather than taking the time and effort to make all those 90-degree corners, I'm going to make the cross cuts first, and then I'll go back and make the rip cuts. If any of these cuts gets a little wavy or crooked, I can touch them up on the disc sander later. There are stacks of parts now ready for assembly. I have the plans here from toymakingplans.com. The front page has a picture of what the completed set looks like, and the plans include detailed assembly drawings. I've made many of these toys from this company, and I've always found the plans complete, accurate, and easy to follow. The plans are downloadable, so you can start in the workshop minutes after printing the full-size plans and patterns. Each set has 2 gas islands, and I'm making 2 sets. The oval sign mounts vertically, and the oval base sits flat. The 2 pieces are connected by 2 3/8 dowel rods. I squeezed some glue into each of the holes I had drilled for the dowels, assembled the pieces, and set them aside to dry. I'll add the gas pumps later. There are some fun little details in this project that add realism. This next glue-up makes a counter that will be mounted just inside the food stop. A base made from 1/2 inch thick by 3/4 inch wide block will be set on its side. A 1/4 inch thick, 3/4 wide piece is glued to it to create a countertop. It's just 2 small pieces, but they add some detail to the food stop, which otherwise would have been empty. I flipped through the pages to find the assembly diagram for the convertible, which Volkswagen called a cabriolet. The body provides the center of the vehicle, and there are 2 layers on top of that before adding the fenders. The 2 layers have 1/4 inch holes that the axles will pass through, and these need to line up with the holes in the body. I have a confession to make here. Even though I just looked at the plans, I added the outer layer first. I didn't catch the mistake until after the glue was dry, so I used the disc sander to remove it, and then I reassembled the car. I made another goof at this stage. Quarter-inch material is notorious, at least to me, for warping during the gluing process. I should have used clamps to hold the layers in place while the glue dried, but I didn't. This resulted in some gaps on the sides of the final product. They were small, but wouldn't have been there if I'd been more careful. That brought me to the standard VW body style, commonly called a beetle or a bug. They were small, but perfect for a college student or someone in the military. As far as the size goes, a neighbor of ours in Chicago said there was only room for your ass and a gallon of gas. The bug parts are a body with fenders on each side. I know from experience to be careful when adding fenders to a vehicle, so I brought a couple of 3/4-inch wheels over from my parts bins. If you don't locate the fenders properly, the wheels may rub against them and not turn freely. I wouldn't want some young child to cry because they had a car that couldn't zoom across the floor properly. The fenders on these are one piece, and the connecting section between the front and rear fenders may look like it should align with the car's bottom, but it does not. It must be about 1/8 of an inch above the bottom for the wheels to turn without interference. I flipped through the pages again to find the full-size assembly diagram for the van. This van may have been ahead of its time because American and Japanese manufacturers didn't start making small passenger vans until many years later. Before adding glue, I set the parts on top of the assembly diagram to confirm their placement. There's a central body piece and a long, thin roof. According to the diagram, the side's bottom aligns with the body's bottom. I double-checked by placing a wheel over the axle holes and noticed the wheels would turn freely. The roof protrudes past the top of the sides. Everything looked good, so I put a bead of glue on the spots where the parts would touch, press them together, and set them aside to dry. The last vehicle to assemble is the VW microbus. The main difference between it and the van is that the microbus has several windows along the side. I have to say something about the name microbus at this point. Every time I hear her say the word, I can't help but think of Arlo Guthrie's song, Alice's Restaurant. It took an entire LP album side for him to tell the story, in Talking Blues style, which had nothing to do with the restaurant. The story was about his adventure with a friend helping Alice by loading half a ton of garbage into the back of a red VW microbus, along with shovels and rakes and implements of destruction to look for a place to dump the garbage after a huge Thanksgiving meal. The trip led to his arrest for littering the next day because the dump was closed and they dumped the trash off the side of the road onto another pile of garbage. The assembly is essentially the same as the van, except the body and roof for the microbus are all one piece. The sides top and bottom both align with the body. Now that the vehicles are assembled, I can move on to the food stop. Each requires 10 4-inch long, 3/8 diameter dowel rods. I thought I'd pass along a tip on how to cut dowel rods on the scroll saw. I made pencil marks where I wanted to make the cuts, and I'll line up a mark with the blade. I found that if you push the dowel into the blade like you would a flat piece, the dowel tends to split about halfway through the cut. However, you get a smooth cut if you roll the dowel into the blade. So line the mark up with the blade, roll the dowel, and get a smooth cut. I used a pattern to make the holes in the top and bottom at my drill press. This is a better choice than a hand drill because of the ability to set a depth stop. I used a Forstner bit because the holes are flat, but it turned out that the dowel rod is slightly larger than 3/8 in diameter. I just ordered a 13/32 drill bit on Amazon so that next time I use a 3/8 dowel that's a little larger in diameter, I can drill a hole that will be better sized. I squeezed a couple of drops of glue into each of the holes, and then I used a hammer to ensure the dowels were in all the way. Doing that side was relatively easy, so I flipped the base over and squeezed some glue into each hole for the top. Actually, these two pieces are identical, so either one could be the top or bottom. It's just convenient to refer to them that way for now. These holes should be aligned perfectly because they were drilled from the same pattern, but it's easy to be a tiny fraction off when drilling the holes, even if the center point is marked. The fact that the dowels are a tight fit only makes the fit more difficult. I edited this step down because it took me about 8 minutes to fit the pieces together to my satisfaction. I may have even uttered a few naughty words during the process. A 1/32 larger drill bit should make it easier next time, but I don't want to go 1/16 larger if I can avoid it. That might make this fit slightly sloppy, and I don't want the pieces wobbling around. This is, after all, a toy, and it's likely to receive somewhat rough handling. I painted the cars in various colors, which you'll see shortly, and the food stop a light blue. I originally planned on making the walls a different color than the rest of the food stop, but ran out of one paint color, so they're all the same now. If I had known I would paint them all the same color, I would have glued the walls into place first, but it's not a big deal doing it this way. The walls fit in place between the dowels, and I put a bead of glue on the edge of each that would go against the floor and press them into place. I needed the walls in place before I could add the counter. I painted that piece a light brown color because I wanted it to be totally different from the walls, floor, and ceiling, and it seemed like some normal color for a counter. I glued the counter to the floor with a bead of glue the same way I attached the walls. The last pieces to add will be the icing on the cake, to borrow an overused cliche. I painted the letters red because I wanted them to stand out. I used a small bead of glue on the bottom of each letter and held them in place for a short time to ensure the glue was on both the letters and the roof. If they don't hold well enough, I'll sand a small flat spot on the bottom of each letter and re-glue them. I rarely work on only one project at a time, and that's true now. The current project has a lot of pieces, but most of them are small. I recently sold the last of 2 large Noah's Ark sets, so I started on replacements. The sides are large enough that I had to glue up 2 panels to have a board wide enough to trace the pattern onto. While I was waiting for the glue to dry, I cut the animals. You don't want to miss this project of biblical proportions coming soon. The VW Small World Toys set is now complete. It took a lot of parts to make, but there was nothing beyond the scope of someone with a bit of experience on the scroll saw. Since this is a child's toy, I tried to make it as colorful as possible, so I painted each vehicle a different color. This seems like a toy set that will keep a child happy for hours of imaginative play. I would love to read your comments on this video, and will respond to every one as soon as possible. Do you plan on making this set for your child or grandchild? What types of projects would you like to see me do next? Do you prefer big projects like this, smaller ones, or a mix of large and small? Is there any particular project you would like to see me make? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell if you haven't already done so. Until the next video is released, suggestions for what to watch next are on the screen.